All right, so thank you so much for being here. I do apologize for the length of the article. I will try to make it the least sufferable as possible. And I got something from the writing group, so let's start. I don't know what you guys think, but whenever I think of the words lawyer or attorney, I usually think about this person with a suit that has kind of some kind of power, right? So I come from a family of lawyers. My grandfather was a lawyer. My step-grandmother is a lawyer. My mom, my dad, my my brother is a lawyer. So I got the feeling of empirically living what it was implied to being a part of a family of lawyers. And it turns out that as before 2016, a lot of the stuff we know now was just empirical. So they decided to make this project where there were 12,000 licensed practicing attorneys were involved. And what they saw was that they were actually suffering, right? From what? Depression, multi-money stress, and problematic drinking. So you could see this from 2 points of view. One would be, well, they are people, so they are allowed, or you would expect them to be mentally healthy, right? And the other one that if you have ever required the services of a lawyer, then you would know that you would like them to be in the right set of mind. So what could be going on in there? And so because of this, more studies were done, and now it turns out that women, now most of the, in the other study, most of the attorneys were men. What has been going on since 2016? Now it turns out that women are also starting to play a role, and what has been going on with them? There seemed to be problematic drinking among women and also some gender disparity when it comes to attrition. And I do apologize, it's not 15, it's 150% of women lawyers were contemplating leaving the profession. So why would that be, right? And what has been done to as of this data? In 2016, there was the formation of the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing, and 2018, American Bar Association Wellbeing Pledge was done. But what the authors in this article wanted to do is like, well, we know these are some of the problems we're facing: stress, substance misuse, and nutrition. What could be some predictive factors for this? So we could identify it, and then why not prevent it? What they wanted to do was look into if there were some work-related factors that would predict this challenges that the legal profession was facing. That would be overcommitment to work, imbalance between effort and work-family conflict, and workplace permissiveness towards alcohol. What they did was a cross-sectional study. I did not get the data collection. I didn't see it in the article, but I do know that the IRB approval was in 2020, and the article was published in 2021. So in between that, they got the data collection. Who took part of this article? Two lawyer settings, the California Lawyers Association and the DC Bar. They have a list of 98,000 associates, okay? So what they did, they advertised in their webpage about the study that it was being done. They said that the summary of it, they said that it was going to be anonymous, and they were going to be randomly selected and invited to participate in that study. So they used the software R for doing the random selection, and they selected 40,000 each. 7 days later, they got a link from RedCap where they could click on it, and they would get them to the informed consent and the survey per se. Out of the 18,000 that were randomly selected, 5,000 consented. 3,343 were evaluable surveys were completed. So for this study, we got a response rate of 6%. I don't think that's a very high one, but that's right. But that's what we got. And out of that 6%, 480 were also excluded because they said that they were not currently practicing law. So we did not want that. We wanted to see the ones that were actually practicing law. So we got 2,863 participants. What did they look into, or what were some of the variables? Give me 1 second just to work the mouse. Oh, wait. Why is it not working? No, it's not moving. No,
okay, so you can use those.
No, but I need to click on those. Yeah. Oh.
You just got to give it a good whack.
All right. Good, always work. So what kind of demographics they looked into? Age, race, relationship status, children, if they had children or not, and work-related demographics, how many hours of work they were putting in, and if they work involved litigation or not. Oh, and it works now, perfect. Mental health variables. I know it's it doesn't look that pretty, but I'm explaining that to you, okay? So they use some scales to be able to measure the outcome variables. I'll start with the PHQ-9. So it's a scale that would measure major depressive disorder. It has a sensitivity of 88% and a specificity of 88%. You got this bunch of questions, and what they did, they categorized it in 5. This is how you would see it in the tables, okay? Next one, the generalized anxiety disorder. This instrument has a 92% sensitivity and a 76% specificity for the diagnosis of anxiety. And they also categorize it now in 4 sections. The perceived stress scale. This one would measure how unpredictable, uncontrollable, or overloading the attorney would feel like their life is. It would be put out in 3, low, moderate, or severe. The audit C. It's an alcohol use disorder identification test. It's a C because it's one part of the original one that is audit. And they dichotomize the results into yes or no. The work-related factors, they use the ERI questionnaire, effort-reward imbalance, to measure 3 things: effort-reward imbalance, work overcommitment, and possibility of promotion. And the answers were categorized into low, intermediate, or high. Workplace permissiveness towards alcohol, they use a scale called Your Workplace. They also put it in the 3. This one, low, intermediate, and high. They ask questions like, how many times in the last 6 months of your last position in the legal profession have some of your coworkers gone drinking off the job? They did answer. 1 was never, 2 only once in the last 6 months, etc. Work-family conflict. This will be to measure the degree to which your work interfered with your family life or your family time. They also put it into 3 possible answers: low, intermediate, and high. Now, there was a special consideration for this study because it was done 2020, 2021. And you might recall we were in the middle of a pandemic. So they also took that into account because they would consider it would be kind of a confounding. So what they did is when in 2 of the scales, they added some questions. In the PSS one, they added, thinking back to before the COVID-19 pandemic, do you believe the frequency of these problems has remained the same, decreased, or increased, meaning stress? And also in the audit C, that's the one that went regarding drinking. It says, thinking back before the COVID-19 pandemic, do you believe the frequency of your alcohol use has remained the same, decreased, or increased? Oh, hold on. Okay. Now the outcome variables, how did they measure it? We've got 3. The first one would be stress. They measure it with the PSS scores. They also put it into 3, low, intermediate, and high. Risky drink it, we use the audit C. And what they did, they used cutoff values adjusted by gender, females equal or over 3 and males equal or over 4. Attrition. They included a question like, are you considering or have you left the legal profession due to mental health problems, burnout, or stress? There were 3 possible answers: yes, no, or unsure. The one that was unsure, were excluded from the study. And what did we get? Or what did they get? Okay. I know, but I try to make it simple, so I use colors and figures. Green means both sexes, well, both genders. Pink means women, and blue means men, okay? And what they use for this one was the chi-square statistical analysis. What happens when it comes to age? As you can see, it turns out that we've got more pink in here. So in our study, there were younger women than older men. And the total, we have more women than we have men, which is opposed to the first study, the one, the 2016 that they based on, right? So we're starting to see a shift here. When it comes to race, there were mostly white for both men and women. But when it comes, when you think about minorities, it turns out that the ones that were statistically significant were for women that were Asian or Pacific Islander and African American. When it comes to relationship status, it turns out that more men were married and more women were single or had never been married. And men were more prone to having children. When it comes to work-related demographics, both worked more than 40 hours a week. And that's supposed to be like the standard, right? You're supposed to work for 40 hours, but it turns out that they were both working more than that. But when it came to what type of job they did, I mean, we know they were all attorneys, but what in the company, which part were they playing? Men turned out to be in higher managing positions, managing partner or senior partner, and women, they were more likely to be in the other category, but I didn't find what that was related to, so I also pointed out the junior associate, we were the closest one with statistical significance. And when it comes to the position that involved litigation, it turns out that more men were litigating than women. For our outcome variables, talking about anxiety, stress, and drinking, with our PHQ-9 measurement, it turns out that men reported that they had minimal symptoms for depression or stress, and women, mild, moderate, or moderately severe. The majority were mild. So we are also starting to see a difference right here that has to do with gender. Anxiety symptoms, men, again, minimum, women, mild, moderate, or severe. Stress, men, minimum, women, moderate, or severe. Drinking, okay? So it turns out that more women were drinking than men were in risky drinking or hazardous drinking, also more women. For this part, the work-related predictor stress, they use logistic regression. And I found that very interesting because we're about to see that in our biostats class today. So it would have been good if we had seen it before, but I'll do my best here. So I want to point out the ones that were statistically significant. For the COVID and stress, they were significant for both men and women, and they also included the odds ratio. So it turns out that if they had said that their stress had changed, that they had perceived more stress due to COVID, they would also be 4 times more likely to have stress. And men would be 2.7 times more likely to have stress. When it comes to age, younger women would report 2.2 times more likely to have stress, men 3.9 and 2.9 more times they were likely to have stress. When it comes to alcohol permissiveness at the workplace, it was non-significant for either men or women, so I'm not gonna talk about it. Work-family conflict, it was non-significant for women, but it was significant for men. So it turns out that men who had reported an intermediate work-family conflict were 1.6 times more likely to have stress, and for high, 2.4 times more likely to report stress. Effort-reward imbalance, statistically significant for both. The ones reporting intermediate, 1.9 times more likely to report stress, and women that reported high effort-reward imbalance were 2.3 times more likely to have stress. But when it comes to men, just the ones that reported high, they were 2.2 times more likely to report stress. On the variable work over commitment, it was statistically significant for both of them. And we can also see that intermediate and high played a part in both of them. Now, when it comes to a possibility of promotion, we have odds ratio, it was statistically significant for both of them. But when it comes to the odds ratio, they're less than 1. So we're thinking that this could be a protective factor. So women who perceive intermediate level of the possibility of a promotion would actually report less stress than one that the ones that would be low. And this can happen for that. When it comes to the predictor of risky drinking, they were statistically significant for both men and women. If they reported an increase in their drinking during COVID, they were 6.9 times more likely to develop a risky drinking pattern. And for men, it was 3.7 times more likely, or there was a 3.7 increase in the possibility of them having risky drinking. Age was not statistically significant for risky drinking. Alcohol permissiveness at the workplace was a factor, was statistically significant for both of them, for both genders. When it comes to women, the ones that reported high, 1.3 times more likely to engage in risky drinking. And for men, it was with intermediate and high. When it comes to stress and risky drinking, the results were not statistically significant. So I'm not gonna mention it. Work over commitment. For women, it was not statistically significant, but for men it was. And it turns out that if they reported an intermediate level of work over commitment, 1.4 times more likely to develop drinking behavior. Okay. when we talk about attrition, like what would be the cause for them leaving the legal profession? I found this one quite interesting because if they reported, it was different for both of them. If they reported an increase in the anxiety due to COVID, they were less likely both to consider leaving the legal profession. And I think that actually makes sense because you're here in the middle of a pandemic, you are worried about your livelihood, like what would you do? I don't think that quitting my job would be even a consideration. I don't know, that would be me. And well, this data kind of helps that out. When it comes to age, it was statistically significant for both of them. Women less than 40 were likely to consider leaving the legal profession, and also 41 to 60 years old. When it comes to men, just the younger ones would consider leaving the legal profession. When it comes to stress, it was significant for both of them. Women that reported high levels of stress were 1.8 times more likely to consider leaving the legal profession. When it comes to men, the ones that consider intermediate and high, mostly high, they would consider leaving the legal profession. There were no data for the alcohol permissiveness at the workplace for these ones. Work-family conflict. There is particularly significant for both of them. And we can also see here that intermediate and high, it did increase the likelihood of them leaving the legal profession. Work overcommitment was not significant for women, but it was for men. So men who had high work overcommitment were 2.3 times more likely to consider leaving the legal profession. And the possibility of a promotion, well, it caught my attention that we did not have that info for women. So I was wondering what that would be, but we do have it for men, and it also seems to be a protecting factor for them considering leaving the legal profession. What do we get from this study? So let's step back. We know, or what they knew, that this was the problem, and they were trying to see what could be the predicting factor for those problems. What we got out of the study was that younger attorneys were 2 to 4 times more likely than older colleagues to report moderate or high stress. Heavy workload was a predicting factor for both sexes, because 67% of the attorneys that were surveyed worked over 40 hours a week, and 25% were over 51. Work overcommitment turned out to be strongly associated with them having stress for both sexes, but mostly for men. When it comes to substance misuse, 30% of the attorneys surveyed said that they were involved in high risk or hazardous drinking that would put them into the range of alcohol abuse or possible alcohol dependence. This is kind of, it's not funny, but it does call the attention that only 2% self-reported having received an alcoholic use disorder diagnosis. So we might want to look into what this difference is, but in other studies. And 80% reported themselves as current drinkers. When we compare the statistics they got with the national statistics, it turns out that for the US population, 55% drank in the past month. So that's less than 80 that we're reporting here. And 70% drank in the last year. So we think that this is really an issue that should be looked into. When it comes to risky drinkers, 55.9% were women versus 46.4% men. The ones that were in high risk or hazardous drinking, 34% women and 25.4% men. So we see that women reported higher this. Which was the most prevalent predicting factor for drinking? It turned out that for both sexes, it was workplace permissiveness towards the alcohol. I think, well, I'll tell you what I think later. And yeah, men reported increased drinking due to COVID were almost 4 times more likely to engage in risky drinking. But women were 7 times more likely to engage in risky drinking if they report having an increase with COVID-19. How about attrition? Turns out that more women than men contemplated leaving the legal profession due to mental health problems, burnout, or stress. The most strongly associated factor was work-family conflict. Women that reported high work-family conflict were 4.5 times more likely to leave or consider leaving the legal profession, while men were 2.4 times more likely. And it turns out that more men than women were married with children. If you recall, it turns out that more women were single. So we're starting to think, or they starting to think that, is it that women would consider, or they would postpone aspects of their personal life that will be considered important, such as getting married, having kids, having someone in your life, to be able to have a better work advantage or better job opportunities? We don't know. Work overcommitment was a predictive factor leaving the profession due to mental health, burnout, or stress in women. Men with high overcommitment were more than twice as likely to contemplate leaving the profession. When it comes to the perceived likelihood of a promotion, you remember that I mentioned that there was a protecting factor because of the odds ratio that we got? It turns out that for men, it was associated with a lower likelihood of them leaving the legal profession. Men with higher, they were 2.5 times less likely to leave, but there was no association found for women. But what I recall is that I didn't see any data that was shown. So I don't know why. So what are some of my thoughts about this? For this study, we had a low response rate. We had 6% response rate. It was done during the COVID-19 pandemic. So could that have influenced them saying, yeah, COVID-19 is taking a toll on me or not? That could be a kind of bias. They did not state the recruitment period. I really don't know if that would be important or not. It would have been nice to see. Now, the second author is part of the Lawyers Wellbeing Nonprofit Organization. I don't think that's a bad thing, really, because I think it's just one person that is in a position of power that would also care about knowing more about what's going on with the lawyers, and would also have more opportunities to make interventions that were improving what we would find. There are some missing data. I really don't know why they would not put all that in. I guess because it was not statistically significant or they didn't consider it would be important. It would have been nice to see. Well, I'm just curious about it because I'm just learning about this stuff. So it would have been nice to see the chi-squares and all the other data. And there might be some, where there didn't really seem to be conflict of interest. Anchor, the first author, was NIH funded. And Crail is the second author of this one, but the first author of the one in 2016. And he currently has a LCC, is the vice president of the research of the Institute for Wellbeing in Law. I don't think that's really a bad thing. That's what the study's about. That's what we found out. And well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Central claim of this paper is that there is a difference in the way that men and women are experiencing the relationships among these variables. And the way they chose to demonstrate that was by carving the sample up between men and women, running two separate regressions.
Yeah.
Something important to remember about statistical significance, it is not transitive. So if one coefficient is statistically different from zero and another one's not, that doesn't mean they're statistically different from one another. And so essentially, because they chose to split the sample like this, run two separate regressions, we don't have actually any evidence that the coefficients or I guess odds ratios or was it odds ratios?
Yeah.
Yeah, odds ratios are actually statistically different between men and women. They probably are, but they carved up their sample and specified the regression in a way that they can't actually make that claim. So there is an easy way to kind of deal with that, but I'm going to leave that to the floor. Hint is you pull the samples and you specify the regression differently.
You couldn't just help yourself, could you? You had to.
Couldn't help yourself. I was seeing the eyes to know that he knew.
Not so easy.
I know.
Well, I want to make this comment. It's not specifically about this paper per se, but in general, is that sometimes people get enamored with a particular statistical analysis. I think they were really excited about logistic regression and just hammered everything with it instead of thinking about, okay, what is my data? What is the nature of my data? And what are the comparisons I actually want to know, right? And then decide what analysis to do, right? And so that's something that I think researchers kind of fall into sometimes. They're like, well, what can I do with my data to make it fit the analysis that I've already got the syntax and the program already ready to go, rather than let the question drive the choice of analysis, right? And that's what it kind of felt like here, because it was very obvious that they didn't compare men and women. They just did religious regressions in the way they created their data. It's not hard to do that other analysis. And that's why it's kind of like, how did they miss that? And how did the reviewers miss that? It was just kind of surprising that they wouldn't just say, hey, now can you then compare those odds ratios to see if they're actually statistically different, rather than just say that you think that they are? Anyway, sorry, I'm just hammering that thing home.
I've got an online comment from Chapman. He says the authors didn't conduct a power analysis either, or at least they didn't state it, which may be why they ran the data this way.
Moment. So a lot of times when we're putting that regression tables in into papers, we leave out the constant term. I'm not a huge fan of this. I think if you estimate it, you should put it in there. But particularly in this paper, that has an important interpretation that we are not able to see, right? Because the constant term would tell us what the difference is between men and women, the odds ratio difference between men and women, accounting for all the covariates they have included. And so since it has an interpretation, I think it should have been in the tables as well. So it's whenever you're putting these tables here, think about what's included and what's not included carefully.
Anything else?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Hagman.
So can you flip back to that one slide, it's towards the beginning where you had a question from the questionnaire? I want to make a point. And meanwhile, I'm gonna also make an editorial of, it's always difficult to make conclusions from 6% participation rates. Because the vast majority of people are not participating.
Workplace permissiveness or another one?
No, the one about the coworkers.
There's three keynotes.
Yeah,
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 I wondered about that too.
yeah.
That one.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I'm just asking everybody here, not you. What do you think that means?
If you're in a big firm, at least one of them, right? It doesn't ask a percentage or anything. So it's like if you're a solo practitioner, like, well, I go drinking or I don't. Right? But if you're in a big firm with 500 other lawyers,
And is there an implication here? Is this, I'm going,
Yeah, am I
am I going
invited?
out? Yeah, am I part of this?
Yeah.
Or everybody's having a party, but I'm not invited? There's multiple ways to interpret this. The point being, if something's really important for you, try to get the original questionnaire. If it's like in your dissertation or whatever, look for those data because it might be very important to understand how they did it and where they might have messed up. As you try to fix other people's messes. And this is an example of a question that I don't think is really useful. So on the 6% participation rate, what is normally done, the next step to try to give you some assurance that there might be some generalizability to the other 94% of the population. One by one. It's simple, it's not that hard. You try to get an estimate of the non-participants, like, for example, and then they'll do a table of non-participants with their ages, their sex breakdown, gender, stuff like that. It's not a very good assurance, but that's the next step that's done. That I've seen it.
yeah, you could also compare with other published data that are representative or at least have decent sample size or decent participation rates to see if they're close enough, right? I mean, it's a horseshoe and hand grenade type of assessment. One other thing about this journal in particular, PLOS, it's an open access journal where they require everyone who publishes in there to make the data available for additional analyses under certain circumstances, right? So if you look at this, you can write to the DC bar and the California bar and see if they will provide these data to you as a researcher. If you say wanted to combine it with other data that we may or may not have from Utah, New Jersey, and other states.
I could have gone so.
Still can. I
Still
mean, it's
can.
not open.
Thank you so much.
Okay, there we go. I believe everyone can hear me, but in an ideal world, this is my kind of problem. You have a math function and you try to minimize it or maximize it. So you have a multivariable function, x1 through x9, and it does that, and you really end up with a response surface like that. And we want to minimize f of x subject to certain constraints. And I love problems like that because they're straightforward. Down. Keyboard, okay. Okay. Okay, there we go. So no statistics are needed, closed form deterministic, and no people are involved, the best part. And that's what I like. My idea of a nightmare is doing a statistical study with a bunch of people. So my background, I won't spend much time at this. I've been on faculty on a part-time originally from 2014. I was manager of corporate product safety at Polaris. I worked on some fun things. You know, there certainly are some good sides. And we'll be talking about, the article talked about the Razor, and the Ranger was sort of also included. But I worked in all the development teams, and I did safety consulting, thinking I'd love expert witness work, and how wrong I was. So I don't like doing it, and I don't do it today. Okay, so what are our shared goals here at the center? I think all of us, regardless of our discipline, or whether we're in health or safety, want to prevent injury, disease, all of that stuff. We want people to lead better lives. And Kurt, Professor Hegman, at the introduction this year, talked about evidence-based medicine. What a wonderful idea. Everything we do really should be evidence-based, I think. But therefore, we want evidence. We'll be able to create countermeasures, whether they're vaccines or barrier guards. Facts, we can understand the truth. And we want to help society through ethical conduct. IRB is one way of doing that, although your mileage may vary, right? So, but when we think of evidence, what we think of the courtroom, right? Evidence. I have evidence, Your Honor. So, but that's really the last thing you should be doing. We really have to deal with ethics, evidence, facts, justice, and truth, and they're all different. Now, legal ethics, unlike good ethics, protect the client and attorney, and an attorney can be disbarred for doing the right thing. Look at this. Just because he did it doesn't mean you're guilty. And that guy's a judge now. So that's one of the billboards along the interstate. Just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty. And the legal process is not a scientific process. The same evidence presented to different juries in different courtrooms will have different results. So don't base decisions based on legal decisions. What is a fact in the courtroom? First off, a lot of evidence can be excluded, so you won't know the whole facts. Anything that's not disputed in court is considered a fact. 2 + 2 = 5. If no one objects, it is equal to 5. Pigs can fly in courtrooms if someone says it and no one complains. And pi is equal to 3. To simplify calculations, in Indiana, the state legislature proposed that in order to facilitate calculations. This was in like the 1920s. I don't think it passed. So don't look to the law for anything good, okay? So let me demonstrate something. Okay, how many of you have seen a seatbelt like this? Some of you are young. Remember, when you sit down, you buckle this thing up, and what had been happening, this has been used on millions of seat belts, millions of cars, I'm sorry. And well, what's been happening is a lawyer's client said, you know, he was side impacted, or he hit someone, he ends up on the other side of the vehicle, right? The EMTs come, the police come, and they say, you weren't wearing your seatbelt. They check off that box. But, excuse me, the client says, time out, I was wearing my seatbelt. I swear I was wearing my seatbelt. So the lawyers came up with a legal theory, not a real theory, a legal theory, that, okay, I'm sitting here, I get impacted by a car. My hip hits this thing, causes it to release, and now I'm on the other side of the car. Okay? So I worked for a company that actually did most of the defense work for the auto company. And I wasn't involved in it, but I talked to the people that were, and they said it's all BS, because if you were to hit, when your hip hits it, there's no stress on this, and you could press it and release it, nothing, it wouldn't come out. And when you do have stress on a seatbelt or strain, like if you're hanging upside down in your seatbelt, there's so much tension, you probably cannot release this. It's just so hard. So I'm firmly convinced that it does not happen. I talked to the people, I know the company. I'm really convinced. And I'm a smart guy, I'm an honest guy, I'm an ethical guy. How many of you believe it doesn't happen? Okay, but let's say you were the car company and they're pitching this line of baloney, and their expert says, I don't care what they say, it happens. And during cross-examination, the car company's lawyer said, well, how can you show that? And watch this. Let's say the guy does this. But that doesn't happen. I'm convinced it doesn't happen in the real world. This is a parlor trick. So, as an engineer, as a technologist, as someone interested in public safety, you try to solve this problem, this parlor trick. You try to keep that from happening. What do you think? Yes, no? Yes, I'm sorry, sir. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, is that a safety solution or is that a business solution? It's a business solution, isn't it? So what they did is now they have little fingers that are sort of just hanging there. And when they sense acceleration, they shoot underneath and keep you from depressing the button. But when you introduce new parts, what do you also introduce? New problems, new failure modes. So yeah, they solved that problem, but did it really lead to safety? So there you have it. Let's say you make a product, you're required to recall an unsafe product according to the Consumer Product Safety Commission when it has a substantial risk of injury or an unusual risk. And of course, all of those are unreasonable risk, I'm sorry. All of those are lawyer words, and the truth of the matter is there are only 5 people in the United States that are qualified to say something safe or unsafe. And those are the commissioners of the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission. And they disagree with each other. It's always 2 against 3 because there are 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans, or 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats. So you really won't get an answer whether something's safe or unsafe, but you only have 24 hours actually to report once you think there's a problem. 10 business days maximum. So as a manufacturer, you're required to do market surveillance. So you go out there listen to customers, listen to retailers, get employee feedback. Maybe they noticed something during manufacturing. Some guy realizes, hey, I might have put something in backwards. And you have to go look at papers, television, social media. Now they're using AI and machine learning to go through the data. And then there are attorneys and lawsuits as well. But as we're being here, you should always be a critical consumer of any information. You have to question it. Things aren't really always what they seem. So let's say you're a manufacturer of all-terrain vehicles. You make cargo racks and winches. The winch is right here. It helps pull you out of a ditch and all of that. So you're out there actively looking for problems, trying to head them off. And you are honest, hardworking, and you are ethical. You're smart, so you got it all. But the data come trickling in real time. And how do you find a problem? Let me show you what some of the data look like. Okay, someone reports that a dealer says something was smoking. He replaced the plastic fender. The district sales manager says to Goodwill it. It was out of warranty, but they said to make the customer happy, we'll give it to him. But was it really smoking? And what was smoking? Was it the vehicle or was it the fender? And why did he Goodwill it? Because if you ever recall it, just because you were being good, we want happy customers, the CPSC will look at that and say, look, you knew you had a problem back then. That's why you gave away the fender. So no good deed goes unpunished. Otherwise, you can say, ma machine, elle fumait, elle est allée, boom, grand feu, blah, blah, blah. Fortunately, it's French. A lot of people know French. It's written in Latin characters. But if it was written in Russian and someone from Saudi Arabia translated it, and then you translate it back to English, what happens? What do you know got involved? How do you handle this kind of junk? Here, I was just riding along, hit a tree, the wheel came off, broken arm and leg, contacting a lawyer. Well, so what? What can we do about it? We have no idea about what happened, but it's a piece of data we're going to be held accountable for processing. The operator's friend fell out of vehicle. Okay, was he wearing a seatbelt? Were they all drunk? I don't know. And this is good. The wench is dead. And that is actually one that I saw. Instead of saying winch, he said the wench is dead. And without skipping a heartbeat, one of the guys on the call said, I thought we stopped selling them. So if someone writes to this, how credible are they? You sort of begin to wonder now, don't you? Sure, it came in from a dealer, not a customer, but okay, his writing skills are certainly questionable. Then look at this. Vehicle exploded fool, leaked. Billy says, don't know why everyone wasn't killed. Should have been this can kill thousands. Figured out why vehicle lacked fuel. We fixed all 7 vehicles and on floor, and we'll build a company for 5 hours of labor and hardware store parts. I've seen hundreds like this. You get these. And it's a piece of data you're going to be held responsible for. What sort of credibility can you place in that? There's so many questions it asks. It doesn't provide answers, it provides questions. All right? So I'm not sure I trust him to tell me what year it was. He do. So each of you is a new engineer at Acme Chair Company. Well, I'm sorry, Acme Toaster Company. And you make the best darn 2-slice toaster in the country. But there have been 2 houses burnt down because of your toaster. And these have been completely destroyed. You'll never see the toaster, house burnt down. But there are 3 toasters out there that have had fires. Customers are sending them back in, and you're going to look at them. So you get them back in. What can you say about these toasters? Are they the same group? They might be. They might be the population of toasters that get extremely hot. Or this could be the one that gets really hot. Could be the population that just gets warm. So I'm not sure. Joe, is this a prospective longitudinal study? How would you classify it? Your
Yeah,
population is growing. You're going down the road in real time.
kind of. It's a field study. That's what I would probably label
Field
it as,
study,
because
okay.
if I call it a prospective longitudinal study, then that I planned on this.
Okay.
It's more like a field study where
Okay.
something's happening and we're observing that, and then we start collecting data.
Okay.
We see these observations and then we track that over time. Now it's a field study with a longitudinal component.
I'm glad you're here today. I learned two important things today. So, in safety engineering, during the design process, we want to use as much science and math as we can. Look at data, look at test results. Standards, I have really mixed opinions about standards. They're minima, and some of them are even good. But get as much input as you can. Talk to the older engineers, look at recall histories, your own as well as others in your field, because you want to learn, well, what did Bismarck say? A fool learns from his own mistakes. A smart person learns from the mistakes of others. So look at your competitors as well. And avoid cognitive biases, be objective. Maybe we have some survivorship bias going on in the toasters, right? We really want to see the toasters that burn the place to the ground, but they don't exist. We have toasters that got hot, and a lot of us are going to be tempted to put them in the same population. And we want to avoid reaching convenient conclusions. And groupthink is a real thing when you get into recall meetings, because we're all on this design team. We all work together 10 hours a day. We go drinking in groups afterwards. So there's a cohesion. And if I suddenly say, no, there's something wrong, and everyone else says everything is fine, especially if you live in a small company town, you're ostracized at work, at home, at church, at the grocery store, at Cub Scouts. I'm serious. Working in a small town, these are real concerns. So groupthink does happen. But we have to be ethical. Can we make the product better for a little less cost? And ultimately, would I want my family using this? And ultimately, with the Polaris product, I reached a point where I had to say no on that one. This is my new book. Because suddenly engineers have to deal with statistics. I saw that book somewhere. I don't know. Maybe I borrowed it from someone. This is the cover of Suddenly Hybrid, right? Suddenly Virtual. I'm sorry. That's book number 1. So I took Joe Allen's book. Said suddenly engineers have to learn statistics. So what do? People may be dying. We have lousy data. So here's one option. We can wait till enough people die and get killed to have statistical significance. How many of you think we should do that? No, no one. So, but we got to do something, don't we? I mean, ethically, we sort of have to. So what can we do? We can do more analysis testing, which is a good thing. A close call, I don't call them near misses, I call them close calls. Really about the same as an accident. You were probably lucky it didn't become an accident. So someone could have been hurt versus someone that did. Have meetings, hire consultants with special abilities. Most of the time you cannot wait for smoking gun evidence. I'm waiting for this one piece of the puzzle to drop in. And sometimes it never shows up, no matter how long you wait, years. So you really have to move forward with imperfect knowledge. And remember, you have 24 hours to tell CPSC, or else they nab you for late reporting. And don't think this is purely an academic exercise, because there are decisions about your appliances, electronics, and automobiles that are made like this. So it's a real issue. Talking about being fined for late reporting, right as I got at Polaris, they were fined $950,000 for late reporting on two things. There was a throttle sticking, and there were also oil lines blowing off, and the oil line would blow off, and you could get burns on your legs. But I know the people, after I got there, I talked to the people who were involved in investigating them. They're all honest people, they're all ethical, but they couldn't find out what was going wrong. And if you don't know what's going wrong, are you going to be able to fix it? You're going to be required to do something, but if you don't know what the problem is, what do you do? Ultimately, they did find out what happened here, and it had to do with engine displacement, a couple particular things lining up. Here, they never did find out what was causing it, because they couldn't reproduce the results in the laboratory in the field. Ultimately, they came up with like a shield, and I guess it sort of worked, but they never really knew what happened. So sometimes you have to proceed with what you got. I'll talk now, getting back to this. You know, in 2011, 2012, I'd seen about a dozen incidents of things smoking, melting, burning. I brought it to executive attention. This was really one of two things where I thought there should have been a recall. But after I left, they were fined over 27 million for a variety of things. Now, if you forget everything else about what I said today, Polaris was fined twice. The first one was before I was there. Second one was after I left. So you can forget anything else. Just remember that, okay? That's all you have to remember. And, you know, people have died. There really aren't any winners. I'm still giving depositions today, 11 years later. And the law firm that accidentally or by pure chance took up most of the cases is at Second and Second. And I wasn't even living here at the time. But so real problems, and they'll track you down. I'm testifying as a fact witness. I'm not making any big money, but I'm going in there and I'm just telling the truth about what I saw. And I'm very complimentary, I'm very objective. The lawyers keep scratching their head, saying, does he like Polaris or does he hate Polaris? And I go in there and say, there are some wonderful people there who really do a good job. But some people, not everyone was like that. So anyway, to this day, I'm still doing that. So in summary, and then I'll close in a moment. And if some of you need to leave at 1, please do so, but I'll only be a couple more minutes. So sometimes you have to make decisions with very questionable data. You don't want anyone to get hurt, but problems don't age well, like fine wines do. Use, you know, be as scientific as you can, but ultimately you have to take a step of faith and ethics and do what you believe is right, because you'll have to live with that. Talk to lots of people, get lots of opinions, be objective, be ethical, and avoid falling into logical traps. Simply do your best. And if you really have worked hard, thought about it, did your absolute very best based on what you knew, No one can fault you. I can disagree with you, but if you're convinced you did the right thing, you did a good job. And that is good enough, because there's nothing more you can do. People will still disagree with you, but you've done the right thing, and that should be good. And scientists won't be satisfied because there's not enough good data, but sometimes you'll never get there. And in closing, here's this picture. They cropped fortuitously. This is what's posted on my board. Eric Cartman from South Park: startup, cash in, sell out, and bro down. You can't fix stupid, but you can put an apostrophe here. And I thought this was always a great sticker by Honda, which is stupid hurts. So anyway, any questions or comments? I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun anyway. Yes.
Point out, late Harlan used to comment that a near miss actually means a hit.
Yeah, it is. That's why I don't use that term. I use close call. What else? What thoughts? The network of plaintiffs' attorneys. I think a plaintiff's attorney suing Polaris got a hold of them, started feeding them information. And yeah, I turn down expert witness work all the time because I just don't like doing it. I'd rather prevent accidents than point blame. Yeah.
How were your interactions with the reporter?
He contacted me surreptitiously, and we talked for a while. But after the article dropped, I heard nothing. Nothing. Which is probably the best thing possible, because you have to be careful what you wish for, But any other comments, any questions? And if you do, feel free to reach out to me, talk to me, email me. I'm happy to talk to all of you. So anyway, have a great weekend, and thank you for your time.